All right. Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. I just welcome to another Future Focused live update. Pure live Q&A. I am Christopher Lind, and I'm looking forward to talking through some things. For those of you who don't know, I do a live stream on Fridays and answer some of the biggest questions on people's minds related to business, tech, and people. So this week, but I also have a podcast that'll drop on Monday, which is related to one of these topics. And then I have a written article that'll drop on Friday or Wednesday next week as well. This week's topics. And so you can ask questions. I am here live. I do engage with the live audience. I will warn you, I don't feed the trolls. So if you just ask dumb questions, if you ask me about the color of my eyes or my teeth, I'm not going to get into all that every week like I always do. So anyway, but the three topics I have today is, first of all, one, LinkedIn dropped a talent velocity report. It's one of their big reports. So I will be addressing some of the topics that come up in that. So if you have questions related to that, I will write more about that next week as well. And it's part of my podcast. But I do have a few questions, kind of a teaser to that. Then there is this growing, this specifically came out of Anthropic this week, but there does seem to be a rise in people in the AI industry starting to have some hesitations about what exactly they're doing and some of the implications AI is having on the world. And it's a little bit of an AI Oppenheimer moment is kind of the way that I'm framing that up. So I have some questions that I've curated from the community related to that. And then the third one is there's an author I don't know. It's not like an author you probably know. She goes by a pseudonym. So, but anyway, she boasts that she came out this week boasting that she can write a book in 45 minutes now. So the authorship is dead. AI is going to allow people to create books in 45 minutes, and that's it. So anyway, I'm going to talk about those because there's a lot that I have to say on all of these. Feel free to ask your questions along the way, and we'll have some fun, as we always do. All right, so let's first start and bring up the LinkedIn Talent Velocity Report. Now, if you aren't aware, it dropped on Tuesday this week, and talent velocity is this new term. And I'm involved with the report, and I know the LinkedIn team, so they would know that I would say this anyway. Talent velocity is another new kind of corporate buzzword. All right. It's a word being used to describe basically the trajectory a company is on as it relates to their employees. So how are they doing related to their employees? What's the overall health of all of that kind of stuff. So that's the word. So if you hear the word talent velocity bouncing around, that's what it's talking about. It's specifically tied to this LinkedIn report. I don't know whether the word will actually stick, whether you're going to actually start hearing things, but for the sake of this report, hey, everybody, that's what this is. And so they publish this. It has a ton of data points. It's, 14 billion users, 14 million jobs or something like this. So it's one of the things I really like about the LinkedIn report is I think of it more as a census than just a survey. They've got a lot of data on what's going on in the market. And so whenever they put something out, yeah, they've got their LinkedIn spin to it, but it's pulling from some pretty rich data. So you can't just write it off and go, whatever. And what it showed, one of the big things is about 14% of companies would say they're there's the comments on the eyes again. 14% of companies would consider themselves leading right now. That's what they would say. There's about 42% that would say they're sitting right in the middle, and then the rest are feeling like they're struggling. And there's a whole bunch of stats. I'm not going to pull up the report. I'm not going to go into every single detail. If you want to hear me break down more of the report from an actionable standpoint, listen next week. But I did want to answer some questions related to this. And yes, I am. So the report mentioned, so the first question I got, because I had a bunch of people email me stuff, and I picked 3 of them for the LinkedIn question. The report mentions a massive gap between velocity leaders, which would be these leading leaders, and laggards. And one of the areas of split is AI, duh. Like, of course, AI is going to be in here. Now, one thing I will tell you, when you look at the report, and it's something I specifically call out in the article that I'm writing for Substack next week, AI is, I'll just tell you, AI is not the biggest differentiator in what companies are doing well and which ones are not. Surprise, surprise. But they are seeing a split where some companies are becoming AI native. And so this person asks, like, some companies are becoming AI native while others are just obsolete. Is that a major factor? Yes, it is. There is a factor. Now, I don't know that I would say AI is inherently what is driving this big thing. Does it play a role in it? Yes. But if you actually look at the details of the LinkedIn report, you'll see that actually trust is significantly higher. They're more likely to build trust. And I actually say that's one of the biggest missing pieces, or not missing pieces. It's one of the least focused on pieces in the entire talent velocity report. You know, there's a lot of talk about integrated talent systems. There's a lot of talk about integrated strategy, leadership strategy, things like this. But at the top of the pile is trust. And for anybody watching who's in a leadership role in an organization, I would say this is probably one of the biggest things that needs to be focused on, is the amount of trust you're building in your organization and where your trust levels are. Because when you take into account all the factors that are going on right now, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's, economics, whether it's AI, any of these things, if you ain't got trust, you're cooked right now. And so, yes, we're seeing a split with some other things. One thing that I do note with the report is the fact that I don't think, there might be some folks, but I don't think many people would read this report and I won't feed the trolls. So if you ask comments like that, I'm not gonna respond to them. But one of the things is, I don't think very many people would read the report and just be blown away. Okay. If you've been around the block, if you've been in the corporate sphere, if you've done anything around leadership or business, I don't think anybody would go, no way. I can't believe this. Like, this is the secret to success in 2026. But I will say trust is one that should be at the top of everyone's pile. Now, the one thing I will add, and then I'll move on to question 2 with this, is one thing I frequently see, Nunya, just so you know, the report I'm referring to is LinkedIn's talent velocity report. It just dropped this week. But with this trust piece, here's one of the biggest things I see missed in leadership. Companies will invest in trust building activities pretty frequently. Okay, it's usually a course that's offered for leaders in organizations. You can go take building trust. You can take classes. You can take things like that. Corporate, will do things like engagement surveys and stuff like that are designed to help build trust, all this other stuff. The thing that I actually think gets missed often most frequently is paying attention to the activities that are actually eroding or destroying trust. And they're everywhere. So, like constant rounds of layoffs. Okay. When you just keep doing layoff after layoff and you don't really talk about it, you just hope you can just not say anything and, you'll be fine. Like that kind of stuff, when everybody knows that you're doing stuff with AI, but you're not really clear what it is. And then you don't really connect the dots between how it fits in. Like those kinds of things break trust. And I do see in my work a lot of organizations that are pouring countless dollars into trust building activities, but pay almost no attention to the trust breaking activities. And when you do that, you are literally taking 1 step forward, 5 steps back, 6, 10 steps back. I mean, I can't count how many times I see organizations where I'm like, hey, good job on these things. Those are good, healthy things. I'm sure your employees value that. And then they jump back like 10 steps because they just missed some of the just basic stuff. Like, I don't know, leaders actually checking in with their people on a regular basis. Having a one-on-one that isn't just tell me how you're doing. Like actually checking in and going, how are you doing? Like legit, not just how's this project going, but how are you? And some of those things, companies miss all the time. And then they wonder why, wow, we're spending thousands, millions of dollars on trust building activity. We'll fly people from around the world to show up at a 2-day event that the company hosts, not realizing that may actually break trust because the vast majority of your employees, it's a huge inconvenience. And then you show up and they're like, well, what were we even doing here? Type of a thing. So just when it comes to the trust thing, it's in this report a 5.5x factor for success in organizations, which I completely support and agree with. Just don't get too wrapped up in the building that you miss the breaking. Okay. Question number 2 that came up was, it talks about talent velocity, which, like I said, talent velocity, I will just say, I think is a bit of a corporate buzzword. I don't know that it's going to stick in terms of, you're going to start seeing it everywhere, but LinkedIn is committed to making it that. And it does describe something. But anyway, it talks about it, the ability to build and acquire skills in real time, and is hiring for potential finally replacing for hiring for experience. Okay, there was a lot in this report, just so you know, that talked about moving to more skill-based organizations. We're focused more on the skills related to what needs to get done versus job titles. Do you have enough experience in this field? Do you have this set of job titles with this? Here's what I will say. No. Or my personal take, even from the data in the LinkedIn report, and then just from my anecdotal experience talking to organizations, consulting with CHROs and organizations, like are some companies sort of getting there? Yeah. I think in some ways AI might actually be driving this in some unhealthy directions, where there's an assumption that because you have AI now, you don't even have to have experience. So we'll just put you in there and let AI help you cover the gaps. And that's just a disaster. I'll tell you right that. But the hiring for potential, actually one of the things in the report, I can't remember what slide it is or what page it is, but specifically one of the things that was most disappointing in the report is, one, at best, and this is in the Asia region, 41%, I think, of organizations are actually making meaningful progress towards being skill-based in the way they handle jobs and hiring. So what? 4 out of 10 companies, less than half, are making meaningful progress. Let me just say, we've been talking about moving more towards skill-based hiring, skill-based, performance, all this other stuff for a long time. I think I've been in the space for decades, and I know I've been talking about it for over a decade. So the fact 10 years in, we're still at best 4 out of 10 making meaningful progress. We got some work to do. Now, here, for all my US audience, which I know a fair amount of folks are here in the US, that number drops to 22%. That was like, whoa. That's bad. Like, the U.S. is falling behind in more than one area from my perspective, but skill-based organizational strategy, we're way behind. 2 out of 10. That's not great. It's not great. So let's just say there's a lot of room for organizations to grow and expand in their ability to do skill-based hiring, skill-based incentives, skill-based reward, like all this kind of stuff, talent mobility, all this stuff. Lots of room for improvement. No, I don't think that's what we're finally seeing replace things. I think we can get there. The tech's there, the maturity's there. Some of the organizational bureaucracy is not there. And honestly, just some of it's a mindset thing. People are still very much locked into this idea that if you didn't have the exact job title that I am hiring for immediately before you took this job, I'm not comfortable taking a chance on you. And I think that's a huge miss. So that's where we are. That's what the data validates. So the data validates. I actually, maybe I'd be curious how they calculated it. I actually think it's a very generous number to say that 4 out of 10 and 2 out of 10, maybe 2 out of 10 is a little closer, but even that, in my experience, less than 10% of companies are actually making meaningful, like measurable, meaningful progress on skills, maybe in pockets. Enterprise-wide, no. But they've got more data than I do. So that's where they're landing. Okay, question number 3 related to the velocity report. 86% of companies lack in velocity. They're either stuck in the mud, which was like 42% or something like that. And then the rest are lagging. They're actually losing steam on some of this stuff. So if the question they asked was, if you're in that 86%, which is a large majority, is it panic time or is there a specific first step to catch up? I'm not one to panic in general. So if you're an organization and you download the report, you look at it and you go, whoa, we're way behind on all of this. Is this bad? I'm not going to answer that one. Is it bad? Like, I don't think hitting the panic button does anything for anybody. Okay. Especially at senior leader roles, in leadership, you're not hired to be in leadership so you can freak out. So even if you were in the bottom rung of the LinkedIn talent data, I wouldn't say the appropriate response is panic time. Are we in a state now where it's get off the pot? Yeah. I mean, if you're still kicking the tires going, yeah, we're thinking about making these moves, we're way past that time. And there's really, like I said, there's no more excuses, in my opinion, that you can make. I mean, you could make them and people will. Are there legitimate reasons to have excuses for why you're not making progress? In my book, no. You might lack in the skills to do it. You might need to do so, but the just like, we're not going to do anything and just continue moving forward like the status quo, that's a fool's errand. I will just say that was a huge mistake. I wouldn't advocate that to anybody. Now, to the question of, is there a specific first step to catch up? I won't say here's this universal step for every organization, because it's part of the reason I do the consulting work I do, to try and help people figure out where to, start. Because there's a lot of stuff you could do, and depending where you are on your trajectory, it might look a little bit different. So I hate, if you pay attention to any of my content and you come here looking for, Christopher's, what are the 5 things everybody should be doing to improve their talent velocity? I mean, I could probably give you 5 things that will improve your talent velocity. Are they the ones you should be focused on? If I don't have a conversation with you, I wouldn't stand behind any of that. So don't ever listen to or read my content and say, I listened to this episode of Christopher's live stream, or I read his article on Substack, and this is why we're doing this, and it didn't work, so it's his fault. I'd be like, well, I could have told you that. I would have told you should have asked me more specifics. That said, hello. With where you could actually start, thanks, man. Where I think everybody could start, though, is, I would say many organizations and many leaders lack an understanding of the skills they have in their organization or in their teams. This is actually one of the biggest pitfalls I think a lot of organizations have, is they don't really know what they have. They know what job titles they may have. They know what jobs they may be planning to hire for, or things like that. They don't, if you were like, practically speaking, what everyday skills are your people using? Honestly, when I talk to most leaders, they're like, well, and they might, throw out some generic skills that you might see put at the bottom of a job description, your usual platitudinal things. If you were like, yeah, but like, practically speaking, what do people need to be really good at in layman's terms to be successful on your team? I would say many leaders, and I would encourage every leader to look in the mirror and ask yourself that. If somebody caught you off guard and said, what are some of the practical everyday things someone needs to be able to do effectively to succeed on your team? If you couldn't answer that in a concise way that didn't sound like a politician on campaign season, you've got some work to do. And I think that is something that universally everybody can be working on, because it does affect the way you hire, the way you promote, the way, basically everything happens. Oh man, YouTube comments or something else. But I think this is something that more people need to spend time on. And this is something that, if it feels big and onerous, if you're a super senior leader in a company, if you're in top levels of leadership and you're like, well, that's not possible for me to know every job. True to a degree, do you hold your leaders accountable for that? And second, AI and some of these technologies that we have now, not just AI, but there are other ways that you can do this fairly rapidly. There's a company, their name is slipping my mind, and I'm not sponsored, so I probably shouldn't throw it out there. But anyway, there's a company that I've done a fair amount of work with where we can pretty quickly analyze what practical skills do you have in your org and what practical skills do you need? Like, what gaps are there? So if you think this is like a 3-year project, it doesn't have to be. Well, I guess we'll see whether or not. Let me respond to this question because this is a good one. Okay, so if you don't in LinkedIn, if you have your settings tweaked wrong, it won't show up this way. But so I can't see your name. But anyway, there are defined skills, but then there's the kind of skills that are not as easily defined based on breadth of experience. Yes. And I agree that that's where the hard work comes in. Oh, hey, Stephanie, good to see you. And I think to your point, yes, there are these like 2 categories of skills. There's like this generic, like, I don't know, let's just use it. I'll use an example that's familiar for the industry I was in. I was in learning and development for many years. If you didn't understand instructional design principles, that's kind of like a go-to, like, duh, you should, you better type of a thing. What many people didn't always know is like business consulting or knowing how to, have a difficult conversation with a stakeholder. That's a practical skill that you literally are dealing with every single day. That is, I won't say it's more important, but in some cases, depending on your role, that actually may be more important. And sometimes there were times. Another example, one of the reasons I was able to hire cross-industry so well was I spent a lot of time understanding the deeper skills that you're getting at, Stephanie. And that allowed me to look across industry. I would end up hiring a lot of game designers a lot of times because they had a lot of background in user experience design. They understood game theory and game mechanics. So they were able to kind of build some of this stuff that might have just like blasted over the head of someone else. And so I think, to your comment, Stephanie, yeah, I agree. Understanding that an AI is very helpful, not just because it can scan job descriptions, but what it can do is it can help actually look at the way work is happening in an organization and actually pick up on some of this stuff. Now, I will say that kind of freaks people out when they realize their enterprise systems are tracking everything they're doing. And if you bring AI in, it can look at even just your communication patterns, who you talk to and how you talk to, and identify skill gaps in an organization. So there's some powerful ways to do it. You got to do it carefully, especially if you're in Europe. Some of the data protection laws and things like that. So like, don't go buck wild with it without checking. But there's some really meaningful ways you can get to it. This question, I will touch on this one, then I'll jump to the next one. So Eddie mentioned here, for a long time and still today, mediocrity, glam, and fakeness has ruled supreme. It's failing and AI will steal it out. What's interesting about this, and I think this is true in the skills realm as well. What I do agree with you, Eddie, on this point is, yeah, I think it has been easier, maybe even still to some degree easy. And in some ways, I think AI can actually enable this. You can kind of skate by on mediocrity. You can be mediocre and kind of fly under the radar in an organization or in a company and kind of be meh, and get away with it. And I will say, I do agree that AI is creating a lot of threat for that. I think that's why a lot of people are uncomfortable, because they've been punching a clock and going home and not thinking much of it. And now it's like, well, if that's all you're doing, and this isn't just on front lines. I mean, this is true of leaders. Like if you're a leader and you're not knowing what skills are on your team, or you're not engaged with your team, or building trust and mitigating trust building or trust breaking activities, it does raise the question, well, why wouldn't we replace you with AI? And I do think that is making people uncomfortable. The one thing I will say, though, that is actually a danger or a risk of AI is, in some ways, AI does prop up mediocrity, in that somebody who doesn't have a clue what they're doing can sound intelligent enough to be dangerous. And I actually think that's one of the unfortunate parts of AI. You see this happening a lot right now where, I mean, it's part of the reason AI content is just booming and freaking so many posts on social media are AI, is because people who don't really have a unique thought and can't actually structure a unique perspective ask ChatGPT to do it. And anybody who's paying attention or who's been in there is like, that is garbage. Like, if you're experienced, you look at it and you're like, that is total garbage. That's why if you ask anybody who's an expert in their field, they'll say AI is not taking jobs. And it is, but they'll be like, it's not going to wipe out our industry. Because if you're an expert in the field, you look at what AI puts out and you're like, that is hot garbage. But to somebody who's not an expert, it often looks good enough. You're like, I don't know. Like, I don't know the difference. And I actually think that's one of the risks right now of AI. And it's a mistake a lot of companies I consult with are making, is there is this assumption that AI agents or inexperienced people with access to AI tools suddenly are seasoned people. And I'm like, no. In fact, their cognitive dissonance and the Dunning-Kruger effect actually is amplified. Some of the worst and most foolish mistakes I see being made in organizations right now are being made by people who think they're smart because they've got AI, and they're talking about things they are not qualified to. I just had one recently, and I won't mention names. I don't do any of that. But I just had one recently that is in some serious hot water right now because they had some inexperienced folks using AI that they had empowered to do a bunch of stuff. And they didn't think to consult the regulatory and compliance team because they're like, well, we have AI. We asked it, are there any legal risks associated with this? It's like, yeah, it's not a lawyer and it doesn't know the industry and it's trained on all of the internet. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And that's the thing. AI can be great in the hands of an expert because they can use it to help speed up or amplify what they're doing. In the hands of somebody who doesn't have a clue, it makes them that much more dangerous. So I see where you're coming from, Eddie, and I do agree that AI in some ways is fleshing out mediocrity, and eventually it catches up. Like now, people who only generate AI content, people are getting pretty keen to it and going, this is trash. But it took us a bit. There was a period of time. There was a period of time where people were like, wow, this person's brilliant. And you're like, what? No, they're not. They don't know what they're doing. Ask one follow-up question and watch them completely crumble. But we catch up. And I think that's what's unfortunate is there are a lot of people who kind of ride the AI grift and they stay just enough ahead of the curve that they're like, oh man, they're just so, they're such experts on this. And you're like, no, they're not, but whatever. Okay. Anyway, great comment, Eddie. And hopefully, I'm curious if that lands with you. Okay, so let's move on to this next one. There's actually a couple things that happened over the past week that's really interesting. But one is Mernank Sharma is the head of safeguards at Anthropic. And there's actually been a couple people at Anthropic that have made the headlines. But in this one in particular, he didn't just quit. So this is the head of safeguards at Anthropic. Didn't just quit, but posted this very cryptic letter and quoted posts from like Rilke and David White and basically said the world is in peril from an interconnected crises. So very high level person in the big AI company. And this isn't the first time. Like there's some of these folks, and I mean, even the godfather of AI, what's his name? Jeffrey Hinton, is doing this now. Now, again, you got to take it with a grain of salt because some of these folks are totally grifting, making 10x their salaries, book deals and going around telling everybody, build a bunker. We're all going to be dead in the next 2 years. So take it with a grain of salt. But there are more and more AI folks who were involved in the fundamental development of it, who are very close to this, who are starting to have these like Oppenheimer moments where they're like, oh gosh, what have we done? What have we done? And this isn't AI wouldn't be the first time in history this has happened. I think it's ironic that Nobel, has the Peace Prize now, and most people don't realize he's he's most famous for creating, I can't remember if it's TNT or dynamite or both, but anyway, modern explosives, which have killed more people than anything else. And so, now there's, the Nobel Peace Prize they give out for peace. But, ironically, it was one of those things. That whole thing started because in his final days, it was like, oh my word, like, what have I done? Oppenheimer did the same thing with nuclear, nuclear fission and the fission bomb and all this other stuff. And so we have a history of doing this. You look at the oil boom. There are a lot of these robber barons that I don't know that very many of them ended up turning, but you get what I mean, where people kind of go, wow, we just kind of ran down a path. And I never really considered the implications of this. I actually just watched a documentary. I can't remember his name. He's Russian, but the guy that created the AK-47 had a very similar moment. He thought he was just defending his country from Nazi Germany. He created what is now the most used weapon in the world. And at the end of his time, he was kind of like, what have I done? And so there are a lot of these AI folks that are having these moments where they're going, oh, crap, like, yikes. And so this head of safeguards quit, citing the world's in peril. And we need to align, and a need to align with his values. So in some ways, which is why I say take it with a grain of salt, it was like, here's my perspective based on where I am. Y'all need to, follow my lead, which to some degree, I get it. If all of a sudden he comes out with a book and a tour date, I'll be like, really? But the question that came through, somebody emailed me, they said, is this AI's Oppenheimer moment where they start to realize the weight of what they've created? Yes and no. Like I said, I think there are some notable AI folks who really are starting to feel the weight of what they've created. They're watching people make really stupid mistakes. They're watching how it's being used. They're questioning and feeling like this is largely out of our control. Like, you can say you built AI and you wanted to do it to help mankind and help it be a better place and a more equitable. You can do that. And then you can watch it be used in surveillance technology and military weapons, and watch unemployment skyrocket as companies wipe out people's careers with AI. And you start to go, well, that's not really what I intended. But once you've created it, you kind of have no control over this. Are we in that moment? I actually don't. I think we're getting there. And so let me say this. I think we will get there a lot faster than we have with other things. And I don't say that as like necessarily a positive thing. I say it because AI is an accelerant. So things that historically would have taken us, I'll comment on that one, Patricia. I do think it's going to come faster, but I think it's because AI is such an accelerator. The fact we're already seeing data on the catastrophic damage that comes at AI misuse is insane. Like, social media, that data all has come, and it took decades before we were like, wow, the like button is one of the biggest contributing factors to the exponential rise in depression. Like, that took decades for us to get there. We're a couple years in and we're going, holy crap, with AI. In some ways, that's good, in that hopefully it accelerates our learning curve. And yet, part of me is also disappointed that, beginning of 2026, I'm like, I'm hoping this is the year of the 2026 AI hangover. I hope. I can touch on that one, Baden. I hoped we would learn faster. And unfortunately, I feel like we really aren't learning terribly fast. We're actually learning kind of slow, and I think it's unfortunate. But so are we there? I think we're getting there. Jeffrey Hinton, I think, he's trying to warn people about some of this stuff. Eddie, to your comment, here's the thing, and then I'll get to yours, Baden. I agree with you that there are certain creative activities that AI just is incapable of doing. It always will be, all this other stuff. Here's where I wouldn't challenge your comment that it can't take creative jobs nor the highly skilled. It's just more like an expansion on that line of thinking. AI doesn't have to be able to do it to take it. That's the thing. And that's what I see in a lot of the leadership consulting I do, is it doesn't have to be able to do it for people to convince people it can, and then they make dumb decisions because they think it can. And then it's a really hard lesson learned when they go, oh, wow, I guess we were wrong. And by then they've already eliminated the jobs of the people that could do it, or they've made collective reorgs to their organization and removed it, and it's a lot harder to clean up. So I agree that there are certain things it can't do. I think, one, we make stupid decisions with AI without really checking. I think the other thing with it is we have kind of poorly defined what is creativity. What does it mean to be creativity? And I see this all the time play out where people are bickering and arguing over AI helping with writing. You get some people who insist AI is terrible at writing. You see some people who say AI is great at writing. One of the topics that if I have time today, I'll get to, this person that's an author that says, I can write a book in 45 minutes. And yes, I agree, Eddie. Over time, we catch on. I think, unfortunately, what happens is a lot of the damage gets done. And then it almost, you even see this now, like it comes in cycles. We think we can get away with things, and then all of a sudden it like starts back up, or you find artisanal folks who really master their craft. And so I do think it'll come full circle. But I think we're going to see some damage, which goes back to some of these things these AI leaders are doing, is they're kind of grieving what they've created. But there's so much money tied to it. They like grieve in one breath and then in the next tell you that if you aren't all in on AI, you're cooked. And so it's like, are you really grieving, or are you just trying to like make as much money as you can on the AI while simultaneously preparing your book and, speaking career on the other side, setting yourself up to win, some prizes for it. And so anyway, I think it's a complicated mix. Baden, your question, I'll touch on this one briefly. It's a big topic. The comment you asked, can I talk about race in AI? One thing that people misunderstand a lot about AI is the training data it's built on. And I talk a lot about how AI is a mirror, not necessarily, and sometimes people get really feisty about that because they suggest that I'm saying anything AI does is something you would do. And they're like, well, I wouldn't do that. And you're like, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is all of the history and all of the behaviors of humans and in our writing and all this other stuff gets built into, and most people don't understand how these big AI models are trained. So they don't realize there's this like training data set that goes into this stuff that's built on, for these big models, basically every piece of digital data in all of existence. And so all that just gets like chucked in the blender of the AI training model. And this is why we're seeing all this copyright stuff with AI, because they took all the copyrighted music, all the copyrighted articles, all the books that have ever been published digitally. They just threw it in the AI blender and churned it up, and then it spit out this model. And that's what we have. And so to your question, Baden, when you think about what is in our data, there is a lot of racial bias. There is a lot of inequality. There are a lot of stereotypes. There is tons of that stuff that is in there. And the thing with that is then you compound that and you say, okay, and all you have to do is look up like what happened to the Twitter chatbot, right? This is how you end up with things like, I won't say it because I'll probably get like demonetized on YouTube, but the Mecca, think German authoritarian thing that X went wild on. And that's exactly what happens is the worst of the worst can get amplified in these AI models. And so a lot of the racial stereotypes, a lot of the, misrepresentation, outdated leadership thinking, some of the stuff, like you think about where the world is in 2026, and we have not arrived by any means. I mean, take a look at the news cycle and you can see how much we still have to go. But we've progressed. And I think, unfortunately, these training data models, they're not only built on like where we are today, they're built on all of human history. And so a lot of the really bad stuff that has happened in there gets cooked into this stuff, and it becomes kind of the standard. And this is why you see a lot of these HR AI products that do hiring. It's why you see it all the time. People are like, wow, this AI hiring tool is racist. And you're like, well, it is, but it's because it's built on discriminatory data. And so when it hears doctor, it goes off of, the 1960s idea that only a man can be a doctor. And so then it's like it prioritizes male sounding names over female ones. It's not, and that's where when I hear people say things like AI is racist, it's not in the sense that it's consciously thinking that. It's pattern recognition. That's all it's doing. It's looking at patterns. So if you think about the training data set and the volume of training data that is biased, it's going to weight heavily there. And you can say I'm wrong, but I'm not. This is how this stuff works. So now here's the thing. Do the companies, and what I want to be clear on is a lot of these AI, HR companies, these other things, they do try and put measures in place to mitigate this stuff. Okay, so let's not pretend like an AI hiring company that gets dinged in the news, they were out necessarily intending, depending on the company, to do what they ended up happening. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is when all of that is baked into the training data, it's like I said, it's like putting it all in a blender and turning it on high and turning it into mulch. If I were to tell you now, go pick out everything that's discriminatory, there's not really a good way to do it, especially if everything you mixed is water soluble and you mixed it in with water. Like you can't just like pick out the pieces now. You've created new chemical compounds and things like that. And so that's where this stuff pops up is you think you've mitigated it all, and then there's something you didn't take into consideration, or something's integrated into AI in a way you didn't think of, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, how did that happen? And you're like, well, I mean, this is what happens, and I talked about it last week. When you have AI built on basically all the context of human history, there are going to be things you don't consider. There's going to be outcomes you don't think about. And AI, because it's a pattern recognition tool designed to find the most optimized, which is just like fastest, most effective by whatever terms it deems, that's the black box. We don't always understand its chain of thought. And so we don't always understand, well, how did you come to the conclusion these were the best candidates? It might spit out a few things, but you're still not seeing the full COT, chain of thought. And so what happens is you don't really know what it did. You don't really know what patterns it found. And so when it starts to make discriminatory decisions, or when it starts integrating bias into things, you can't exactly pinpoint, well, was it the training data set? Is there a restriction that you can try and do? And if you want to look at Grok, look at what happens every time they try and patch Grok. It gets nailed for like creating child inappropriate content, and they try and patch it, and you're like, well, you're not going to patch it. Like, you can't. So I think this is where some of the complexity, to your point about AI and race and some of this stuff, this is how it gets in there. And this is why you still need people in the loop committed to going, hey, these things are not okay, or this is not what we stand for as an organization. You need people who are looking at that and monitoring that. And that's why we need regulations around this stuff. And I know people get triggered when I say we need AI regulations, but we do, because you just let this stuff go off the chain, the worst of the worst will happen. It will happen. So anyway, All right, I'm going to jump to the third question I had about Anthropic's researcher, and then I'm going to jump to the final topic because your comment, Eddie, about, or somebody said something. Oh yeah, Eddie, on the book thing. So I will get to that one. But anyway, so this head of safeguards at Anthropic, okay, they said like, oh no, what have we done? And they left. And now they're leaving to become invisible. This was the thing they said. They're going to be invisible. They're going to, they've made all this money being head of AI at Anthropic. They have more money than most people will experience in their entire lives. And now they're going to flee off into the humanities for meaning. And so, they're going to sail off into the sunset and you're welcome, Baden. Do whatever. I don't know, buy a cabin on a lake and paint or something. Who knows? This is what happens with a lot of these tech folks. They decide the question they asked was, if people are building systems or fleeing the humanities for meaning, what does that tell us about the future of work? Actually, I would not necessarily interpret what they're doing. I would say, watch what happens to Sharma in 10 years, then get back to me. Because here's the thing, somebody who got into AI safeguards, who cares deeply about the building and regulation of technology, may have this sense of hopelessness and emptiness around humanities, and they're going to go off and live in the mountains and be an author and drink tea the rest of their life. My guess is, though, they didn't get into what they got into because they hated it and they deeply actually just wanted to be an author on the side of a lake. They got into it because they like that stuff. My guess is they're going to go off and they're going to paint a few paintings, go a little Bob Ross for a bit, and then they're going to go, boy, I really hate this. This is not what I like doing, and I kind of want to get back into it. And I think that's where you look at Jeffrey Hinton. He was an AI strategist. So now he's still doing anti-AI strategy. He's just kind of coming at it from a different angle. So I do think people kind of needing to take a break from some of this stuff as they go, what are we actually doing? But here's what I actually think it is. When I talk to most people, I do a lot of coaching. And one of the things that comes up in coaching a lot is most people, going back to earlier in the live stream, I said a lot of people, if you said like, hey, what skills need to be on your team to be successful? They can't necessarily answer it. A lot of times, if you ask somebody, hey, what do you do? And they tell you and you go, why do you love it? Like, what about it do you really enjoy? A lot of people struggle with that. They're like, well, like and this is why people have midlife crises. And this is why, people quit their job on a dime and they're like, I'm going to go write a book. And then they go write a book, or they start and they're like, man, writing a book sucks. I hate this. And you're like, well, duh, because that's not what you like doing in the first place. So I do think there is this natural arc of like, and I see this happen a lot with corporate execs. Corporate execs, they get burned out. They get to the top of their field and they're like, oh, now I've been here. I just want to go work at Home Depot. and then they don't like it, or they go, I'm just done with the machine. I'm done with corporate. I'm going to go consult. And then they try and they realize like, boy, I hate business development. I hate creating content. I just like being, at the top of a company and making big decisions in this. And they end up going back. So is Sharma leaving AI to go explore humanities on, some deserted location an indication of where we're going? I don't think so. Like I said, might this be a use case where they do? Maybe they actually were, wired to be a tea drinking author on the side of, a mountain stream. But I just would say somebody who is in that role is probably not going to find a lot of satisfaction completely disconnecting from technology. They love technology. That's why they're in what they did. Now, might they shift and maybe they don't do safety, type of stuff for AI anymore? Maybe, because maybe they go, I just don't want to be anywhere near it. And so they make a shift, they make a pivot. That's largely what I did with my career. I was in the learning and development field, even though that's not really what I did. It was more about human performance and business transformation. And I decided that, it's not really what I do. So you make a pivot, but you're not like reimagining yourself. AI is not going to suddenly, create a whole new generation and all anybody does is become philosophers or things like that. Some people just, they don't like doing that. Okay, so last topic, and then I got a meeting here I got to jump to. But okay, so Coral Hart, that's the pseudonym of this author. Okay, this topic related to this is this author that said now everybody can, create a novel in 45 minutes, and boom, it's the end of authorship. And now, granted, this person is just for the record, this person is a book machine. Okay, this person has generated 200 published books and has 21 different pen names. In my opinion, this person is not an author in the sense of like the artist or the creative type. This is someone who has figured out how to package words in a way that make people go, good book. And then does it on repeat, churns out books left and right. So a person who I wouldn't really, yes, they're an author by technical terms. They've published a lot of books. Are they an author in the sense of someone who, one day will think about, a Shakespeare, if you will, somewhere where we go, wow, there's a classic author? No, this is somebody who churns out books for a living. So is somebody who churns out books for a living going to get a lot of lift out of AI? Yeah, because they know how to churn out writing super fast and market it and package it in a way that makes people go, I want to buy it. So it's the thing I didn't like about this person coming out going, this is the end of authorship, everybody should just use AI for this, is like, no, going back to, I think Eddie, you said it, like people are going to see through this. I guarantee anybody who actually knows literature, if they read any one of these romance novels, would be like, this is straight up garbage. Like, this is trash. Now, I'm not knocking Coral Hart, so don't come at me for that. I'm just saying, I guarantee somebody who's a true literary expert would look at it and go, I mean, yeah. And most people, if you look at the stats, most people who buy books don't even read them. They do it so they can say they're well read. Oh, I just read this, and they read the Cliff Notes. But I want to get past that, because here's the thing. It's feeding this idea that more is just better. If we just churn out more, if you're an author and you used to do one book every 2 years, if you do 30 books a year, you're going to be a more successful author. And I would actually say not at all, like not at all. I do see your latest comment on the AI church. We'll see if I have time to get to that one. I don't know if I will today, but yeah, like, so really. And here's the thing. Let me just first say this, because one of the questions that came in, I'll tackle this first. If you can churn out 200 books a year, because that's what she says, you can churn out these books, every day you could be writing a book, 45 minutes. You should be writing 8 books a day, according to her standards. If you're producing that many books, you're a content mill, you're a publishing house. And I would actually say, if you're an author putting out that kind of content, the perceived value, and this is just basic economics, if you're putting out 200 books per year, just hypothetically speaking, let's say you take it slow and you only do 1 book a day. If you're putting out that many books, you might be feeding the algorithm. You might boost yourself to the top of the Amazon bestseller list because you've just thrown so much at it that, you win some award that says you're the most popular author in all of history, like whatever, but it doesn't mean anything. I actually think it does more brand damage than good. It really does. And people are starting to push back on this. The one thing I will say is, even though companies and things like that might really be driving more is better and all this other stuff, society is pushing against it hard. This idea that, like, if you're an author and you're churning out dozens and dozens of books every year, people are literally going to go, you're using AI, and your credibility is going to go down the toilet. And you can sit there and go, no, I'm not. And they're going to go, yes, you are. Like that. It's physically impossible for you to even come up with that many concepts of meaningful books in that amount of time and actually flesh it out in any sort of structure. Like, so while in theory, could you write a book? I think, Eddie, you said it. You wrote a book in, 4 days with AI. Could you, in theory, write a book in 4 days? Maybe, my guess is if it's anything of even remotely decent quality, it's because you'd been working on this idea in your head for years. You knew what you wanted to say. You had a structure. You had some of this stuff. You have a wealth of experience, and that's not being taken into account. And so, maybe it can speed that up. But to say you can write a book in 45 minutes, anybody who says that, I would actually challenge, has not actually written a book. At least not in the sense of you can't proofread your manuscript in 45 minutes. Now, granted, you can say, well, I didn't say that. Technically, I said you could write it. Okay, could you write a very fancy prompt and shove it into, Gemini or Anthropic and have it spit out a 150-page book in 45 minutes? Even that, to be honest with you, I would challenge that. Anybody doing anything of meaningful value with AI, I say all the time, AI is most likely not saving you all that much time if you're using it well. It's helping you create a better quality product. It's helping you get better at what you're doing. It's not just, here I downloaded this prompt off this mastermind course I paid $20 for, and I threw it in Gemini, and now I'm an author. Okay, you can get your little gold pin that says you're an author now, and you can schleck your trash. But, I think to your point, yeah, authenticity is going to have new value. People who are, and this is where I think the whole debate over, is AI good or bad? Can you use it or not? I'm like, how are you using it? I know some people who use it really well and it helps them come up with a draft. I know some people who can't stand that because they know what they want to say and they just want it to do some refinements. I know some who swear off AI altogether when it comes to anything creative. Great. Different spaces for different people. It's fine. But I think the folks who do it wisely, who are involved, who are actively using their skills and expertise and growing, they're going to do a good job, and the authenticity is going to come through. If you're just schlecking junk, you're not creating more value because you can churn more out. So then the other question was, she generates a book in 45 minutes to win the race. And this is one of the things that I actually think is funny, because I see this all the time where people are like, we're trying to win the AI race. We've got to win the AI race. I'm like, what race are you running? And what prize do you think you're getting on the other end? Okay, you learned how to use AI to write 200 books a year. What race? Most books written by AI in 2026? All right, you got your award. Good for you. Now nobody cares, and you have no real brand because you wrote so many books. Nobody can even process what the heck you wrote about. You cast the widest net. Nobody knows you from anybody, and they can't even really tell what your voice is. And so great, you won that race. I hope you enjoy your trophy. And I think I see that all the time with organizations where they're like, we got to get AI in here to win the race. And as a consultant, when I advise on this stuff, I'm like, race to what? What do you want to be when you grow up? What is AI enabling you to do more of that you're not doing today? What do you wish you could do, or what do you wish you were doing better? Well, we're a healthcare company. So you want to be a healthier carrier company? That's not a thing. What do you want to progressively get better at? Then figure out where AI fits into that. And I think, to the comment of authenticity is going to have more value moving forward. I completely agree, because the people who can actually articulate that and say, here's what I'm trying to do, here's what I want to get better at, here's specifically how AI is helping me with that, here's where it doesn't help because it doesn't actually help me with that. It actually makes me worse because when I use it, I erode those skills. The people who do that, great. Okay, fine. But Eddie, and then I got to wrap on this. What's funny is on this one, the Jim Patterson guy. I don't know that guy. But anyway, are there people who love following after a certain author, who might be thrilled that their favorite author now is using AI and they're putting a new book out every month because they read their books incessantly? Sure, you might have the super fan crowd, but what you don't realize, if you're an author and you start doing that, you may actually turn off your super fan crowd, because to put a book out at that kind of pace, even your super fans are going to start going, this doesn't really sound like them anymore. The quality of this has just gone down the toilet. Like, it might take a bit. Your super fans might keep buying your books for, a few months or something like that. And then pretty soon they're going to go, well, this is trash. I'm going to move on to somebody who isn't doing this. And you may actually isolate yourself from the very people who have been supporting you, advocating for you, helping you get where you are in the first place. And that's where I don't say, like, don't sell out to AI, as in, like, don't use AI or you're a sellout. I just mean, don't lose who you are to AI, because pretty soon you'll just be miserable. And we see that in the data now already. People who are just handing themselves over to AI are some of the most miserable people on the planet. So I got a meeting I got to run to. Thanks, everybody, in the comments across all the different platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, Substack. This has been super fun. Thanks for your questions. Hopefully you found this helpful, and we will see you next week. I think I'm here next week. So anyway, with that, I'm Christopher Lind. This has been Future Focused, and we will see you on the other side.